6:41 a.m. One text. I'm fine. Don't be dramatic. That was all she sent. No explanation. No apology. No mention of where she'd been or when she was coming home. Just that sentence, dropped into the quiet of the kitchen like it didn't carry any weight. The coffee maker was still running, hissing and popping like it always did. The house looked the same, lights off, dog asleep in the corner, my jacket hanging where I left it, but something had already shifted. I stood there barefoot on the cold tile, phone in my hand, reading the words again, slower this time. She didn't come home. She didn't explain. And before the coffee finished brewing, before the day even started, I understood something with a kind of calm certainty that surprised me. My marriage didn't end in a fight. It didn't end with yelling or accusations or slammed doors. It ended in a sentence. Don't be dramatic. Not angry. Not defensive. Dismissive. Like my concern was an inconvenience, like I was interrupting something more important. The kind of thing you say when you've already stepped away and don't want to be pulled back in. I set the phone down on the counter and watched the screen go dark. For a second, my reflection stared back at me, tired eyes, unshaven, older than I remembered feeling. I waited for the panic to hit. For anger. For that rush people talk about. It didn't come. What I felt instead was quiet. Heavy, but steady. Like the moment right after you realize something has been broken for a long time, and you finally stop trying to hold it together. The coffee finished brewing. I poured a cup and didn't drink it. I just stood there, listening to the house breathe, knowing that whatever came next, I wouldn't be pretending anymore. My name is Evan Miller. I'm 45 years old, and I fix heating systems for a living. Furnaces, boilers, old ductwork nobody wants to crawl around in anymore. It's not a flashy job, but it's steady. People call when their house goes cold, and I show up. I've always liked that part of it, something broken, something real, something you can actually diagnose. I've been doing it long enough that my days follow a rhythm. Alarm at 5. Coffee before 6. Out the door by 6:30. I come home on time because most of the time, there's no reason not to. I've never needed an excuse to be where I said I'd be. Laura used to be the same way. We met when our lives were simpler, when evenings meant dinner at the table and reruns playing in the background while we talked about nothing important. She worked hard, I worked hard, and we were tired in the same direction. For a long time, that felt like enough. Then her job changed. New title, new expectations, new language. Suddenly everything was team dinners, late projects, networking events. She'd say it casually, like she was just narrating traffic. I didn't question it. Why would I? People grow. Careers expand. That's how life is supposed to work. She started coming home later. Not every night. Just enough that it became normal without becoming alarming. Sometimes she wouldn't come home until after I was asleep. Other nights she'd text that she was grabbing a drink with coworkers and ask if I wanted her to pick something up on the way back, like that erased the distance. I told myself it was temporary. A busy season. A phase. Trust was easier than doubt. Trust let me keep the routine intact. Dinner at 7, leftovers wrapped and put away when she didn't show. Trust meant I didn't have to imagine where she was when I turned off the lights alone. There were moments that should have slowed me down. Her phone always face down now. The way she'd smile at messages she didn't share. Jokes about Mark from work that landed too often for someone who supposedly didn't matter. When I asked simple questions, she'd laugh and say, "You overthink everything," like it was an endearing flaw instead of a warning sign. I accepted it because accepting it kept the peace. I wasn't blind. I just chose not to stare. I'd tell myself I was being mature. That marriages survived on trust, not suspicion. That if you went looking for problems, you'd always find them, even if they weren't real. So I stayed steady. I showed up. I paid the bills. I fixed what broke. I believed that consistency counted for something. But standing in that kitchen at 6:41 a.m., rereading that text, I realized how one-sided that steadiness had become. How easily she dismissed me. How practiced it sounded. That's when it occurred to me that maybe I hadn't been trusting her. Maybe I'd been avoiding the truth. I didn't get angry. Not then. Not immediately. I didn't slam cabinets or throw things. I didn't pace. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there in that quiet kitchen with the sunlight creeping in over the counter, the dog asleep on the rug, and the text still glowing on my phone like it was a ticking clock. The word that struck me wasn't fine. It was dramatic. It was that exact phrasing, "Don't be dramatic." that lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. Not because it was clever or cutting, but because it revealed something deeper than I had wanted to see. I'd always thought the worst part of betrayal was the discovery. But that morning I realized it wasn't the thing itself. I mean the thing she was doing or where she was. It was the dismissal of my humanity. The suggestion that my feelings were childish. That I was somehow excessive for caring. The late nights stopped being goofy coincidences in hindsight. The team dinners that ended at bars instead of tables, with laughters too loud to be purely professional. The jokes about Mark from work that seemed harmless when she said them, but in retrospect landed too often and too comfortably. The familiar line, "You overthink everything," which used to be almost endearing, like she was playfully teasing me. But now it felt like armor she wielded to deflect any questions that might cause discomfort. Standing there, I realized I'd been holding onto the narrative that kept me grounded. She's busy. She's stressed. She's successful. I'd trust her. That narrative had been easier to believe than the alternative. Easier than imagining that all the little inconsistencies weren't random, but intentional. And she was good at this. Too good. She didn't raise her voice, didn't escalate. She just offered plausible explanations, half-truths, humor as a shield. It was subtle. So subtle that accepting it as normal felt rational, even healthy. Until the moment it wasn't. I remember thinking of all the mornings she didn't come home, when I told myself she'd fallen asleep here or had to work late. I never checked. I didn't want to be that guy. The one who looked for problems instead of assuming the best. But that desire to be reasonable became a liability. An excuse. A blindfold. When the thought hit me, she said, "Don't be dramatic," so I checked one app. There was no emotional eruption. No shaking hands. No racing heartbeat. Just a calm, quiet decision. Not to accuse. Not to ambush. But to know. There was no theatrical setup, no slipping into obsession. Just a methodical click through an app I'd installed months ago, just in case, when downtown started getting aggressive about tow zones. I'd barely used it, let alone even registered a memory of where I'd parked last week, let alone the patterns of someone else's entries. But there it was. Activity at times that didn't line up with any of her late nights at the office. An unfamiliar address, but more than one visit. Not accidental, not once. Repeated timestamps, quiet but persistent. And attached to the location, an owner's name. Mark Dalton. The same, just a coworker, name that had entered our conversations with a casualness that now felt rehearsed. The pattern was emerging. Not chaos. Not random. A pattern. Something consistent. Something measurable. Something no longer explainable with the kindness of my assumptions. And in that stillness I realized something else. I wasn't reacting. I was observing. Not because I was detached. Not because I didn't feel anything. But because I had to see the situation for what it actually was, not what I wished it was. It was a truth I had been avoiding. And in that moment, I stopped avoiding. I didn't text her back. Didn't ask where she was. Didn't ask why she thought I was being dramatic. That was the first real break, not the discovery, not the app, but the decision to stop reaching for explanations that were never going to be honest. For years, every uncomfortable moment had been smoothed over with reassurance. Every question had been answered just enough to quiet it. I realized how much effort I'd spent maintaining that balance, how much energy it took to stay agreeable, understanding, patient. That morning, I stopped. I finished my coffee even though it tasted burnt and thin. I put the mug in the sink. I fed the dog. The routine stayed intact, but something underneath it had shifted, like a support beam quietly removed from a structure that still looked fine from the outside. What surprised me was how clear my head felt. There was no urge to confront her immediately. No impulse to prove anything or demand the truth. I didn't feel clever or triumphant. I felt focused, like I'd finally stopped guessing and started observing. That word, dramatic, had stripped the situation down to something simple. She wasn't worried about hurting me. She was worried about being inconvenienced by my awareness. That mattered. I thought back over the last year with a different lens. The cancelled plans. The way she'd grown irritated when I asked neutral questions. The tone she used when she said my name lately, sharp around the edges, like she was already somewhere else when she spoke it. None of it felt isolated anymore. It lined up too neatly. I'd always believed anger was the dangerous emotion. The one that made men do stupid things. But what I felt wasn't anger. It was distance. And distance gave me room to think. I opened the parking app again, slower this time. Not because I needed to confirm what I'd seen, but because I wanted to understand it fully. Dates, times, duration. I treated it the way I treat a system failure. No assumptions, just information. I didn't imagine them together. I didn't picture anything physical. I didn't let my mind wander into places that would hijack my control. I just looked at the data. Patterns tell the truth even when people don't. The visits weren't random. They clustered around nights she'd said she was staying late. They followed a rhythm: arrive after 9, leave before morning traffic. Long enough to sleep, short enough to avoid questions. Whoever lived there wasn't a convenience. He was a destination. And that's when something else broke inside me. Not loudly, not all at once, but cleanly. I stopped seeing myself as a man waiting for answers. I became a man preparing for outcomes. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't announce it to myself like some declaration. It was quieter than that. More practical. Like realizing winter was coming and checking the insulation instead of arguing with the forecast. I made a mental list. Finances. Access. Documentation. Not in a paranoid way. In a responsible one. If this was real, and everything in me said it was, then reacting emotionally would only give her room to reshape the narrative. I'd seen how easily she reframed things already. I wasn't going to give her that. I thought about how she'd looked at me the last time we argued, eyes flat, like she was already done but waiting for me to catch up. I understood then that confrontation wouldn't bring clarity. It would bring denial, deflection, maybe even tears that asked me to feel sorry instead of paying attention. So I stayed quiet, not passive, intentional. I took screenshots and saved them in a folder labeled with today's date. I emailed copies to an account she didn't know existed. I didn't do it with shaking hands or a pounding heart. I did it the same way I document a repair, because once something is recorded, it can't be tucked away. By the time the sun was fully up, I felt steady in a way I hadn't felt in months. Not happy, not relieved, grounded. Whatever this was, it was no longer happening to me in the dark. It was something I could see clearly. And clarity, I was learning, didn't come with drama. It came with silence. It wasn't Uber. It wasn't messages. It wasn't anything dramatic or invasive. It was an old shared parking app we'd downloaded years ago, back when downtown started towing aggressively and we thought it was smart to have a backup record, just in case. We used it for a month, maybe 2, then forgot about it entirely. At least I did. Laura must have remembered. I opened it again later that morning, sitting at the kitchen table with the curtains half drawn, the house quiet in that hollow way it gets after a long night. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't hoping to be wrong. I was just looking. The interface was simple. Location history. Dates. Times. Duration. No opinions. No emotion. Just movement. The first unfamiliar address stood out immediately. Not near her office. Not near any restaurant she'd ever mentioned. Residential. A small complex on the other side of town. I clicked into it and felt something settle in my chest. Not a punch, more like weight. The timestamps told the story without commentary. Late arrivals. Consistent departures. Always after 9. Always before morning traffic. Not random. Not once. Repeated. Intentional. I scrolled further back. There it was again. And again. Different weeks. Same address. Same pattern. Long enough to stay the night. Short enough to claim exhaustion the next morning. Whoever lived there wasn't a detour. He was a destination. I didn't imagine what they were doing. I didn't picture her body or his hands. I refused that path. Visualization turns observation into pain, and pain clouds judgment. I stayed with what I could verify. The property owner's name was listed beneath the address. Mark Dalton. The same name she'd dropped casually over dinner. The same name she'd laughed about. The same, just a coworker, she'd insisted I was reading too much into. Seeing it there, typed in plain text, stripped of tone and context, changed everything. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't intuition. It was confirmation. I took screenshots. Not hurried. Not compulsive. One for each visit. I named them by date and time, the way I label service reports. Organization matters when things stop being theoretical. I noticed something else then, something smaller, but telling. The visits lined up almost perfectly with nights she'd worn that newer perfume. The one she claimed was just a sample from work. The one that didn't smell like her. Patterns connect when you let them. I leaned back in the chair and listened to the refrigerator hum. The house felt different now. Not hostile. Honest. Like it had finally stopped lying to me by omission. What surprised me most was how little I felt the urge to confront her. The truth was already doing the work. There was nothing to extract from her mouth that would make this clearer. Confessions are messy. Data is clean. I closed the app and locked my phone. This wasn't about catching her in a lie anymore. It was about understanding the scope of it. How long, how often, how deliberately my absence had been scheduled into her other life. I thought about how many times I'd defended her to myself. How often I'd chosen trust over curiosity. I didn't feel stupid for it. I felt done. By the time noon rolled around, I'd saved everything in 3 places. Phone, laptop, external drive. Not because I planned to weaponize it, but because reality deserves to be preserved accurately. I stood up, rinsed my coffee mug, and set it upside down on the rack. Outside, a car passed. Someone laughed. Normal life continued, unaware. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shocked. I was informed, and that changed the rules completely. I didn't confront her. Not that day. Not the next. Once I had the information, confrontation felt unnecessary, even counterproductive. Arguments invite performance, denial, emotion. I wasn't interested in any of that. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to finish something cleanly. Instead, I started adjusting the parts of my life that didn't require her permission. I changed the lock code on the garage first. Quiet, practical. She never used it anyway. Then I canceled the joint credit card, the one tied to house expenses, that somehow kept picking up restaurant charges I'd never seen. The bank representative asked if everything was okay. I said yes, which was true in the only way that mattered. I opened a new checking account in my name alone and redirected my paycheck. Same amount, same work, just no longer feeding into a shared assumption that we were still operating as a unit. At work, nothing changed. I showed up. I fixed furnaces. I answered calls. People complained about the cold. I solved the problem and moved on. No one could tell that anything in my personal life had shifted, and I liked it that way. Stability is easier to maintain when you don't announce cracks. At night, I stopped waiting for her. That was the hardest habit to break, not emotionally, but physically. The way your body stays alert for a sound it's used to hearing. Her car in the driveway. Her keys at the door. I trained myself to go to bed when I was tired, not when I heard movement. The house adjusted faster than I expected. I compiled everything I had into a single folder. Screenshots, dates, times, notes, nothing editorialized, just facts. I didn't label it with her name. I labeled it, records. Because that's what it was. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was logistics. What surprised me was how calm I felt moving through it all. Not numb, clear, like my nervous system had finally accepted what my mind already knew. The guessing was over. The pretending was over. There was relief in that, even if it came wrapped in loss. I thought about how often I'd minimized myself to keep things smooth. How many times I'd accepted distance as maturity. I understood now that I hadn't been wrong for trusting her, but I would be wrong to keep trusting her now. That distinction mattered. By the 3rd day, everything important had been separated or documented. Accounts, access, evidence. I hadn't spoken to her beyond the bare minimum. She texted a few times, casual, vague. I didn't engage. Silence isn't punishment. It's clarity. What had once been private, my doubts, my observations, my quiet unease, was now real. Concrete, measurable. And because it was real, it no longer lived only inside me. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't collapsing. I was closing a chapter without tearing the pages. When she finally came back that evening, I was ready, not emotionally braced, not rehearsed. Just prepared. The way you are when you've already accepted the outcome and are only waiting for the moment it becomes visible to everyone else. The door opened. The truth followed. She came back that evening just after 7. I was sitting at the kitchen table, paperwork spread neatly in front of me, not because I needed to look busy but because I didn't want to pace. The house was quiet. Too quiet for someone who believed everything was normal. I heard her car pull in. The familiar sound didn't trigger anything in me anymore. No anticipation. No relief. Just information. The door opened, then closed. A pause. I stayed where I was. A second later I heard the key slide into the lock. Twist. Stop. Another twist, harder this time. When it didn't give, she laughed. Actually laughed. Like the door was playing a harmless joke on her. "Evan?" she called out. I didn't answer. The handle rattled again. Slower now. More deliberate. I could picture her face changing, the confusion edging into irritation. Finally, she knocked. Did the lock jam or something? I stood and walked to the door. I didn't rush. I didn't drag it out either. When I opened it, she was standing there with her bag on one shoulder, coat still on, smile half formed and already fading. My key doesn't work, she said. I know. She blinked. Once. Then again. What do you mean, you know? I kept my voice level. It means the lock was changed. Her laugh came again, thinner this time. Why would you do that? I looked at her the way you look at someone who's already answered their own question and just doesn't want to say it out loud. Who is he? Her expression shifted quickly, surprise, then annoyance, then a careful neutrality that told me she thought she could still manage this. Evan, you're being. Don't, I said quietly. Not angry, just final. Don't do that. She dropped her bag. It hit the porch with a dull thud. This is insane, she said. You changed the locks without talking to me? You stayed somewhere else without talking to me. That's not the same thing. I nodded once. You're right, it's not. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. You don't even know what you're accusing me of. I held her gaze. Mark Dalton, the apartment on Ridgeway. After 9, gone before traffic. The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Her face drained slowly, like color pulled out with intention. For a second, she said nothing. No denial. No anger. Just silence. I waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller. You went through my stuff. No, I said. I looked at mine. She shook her head, searching for ground that wasn't there anymore. This is a misunderstanding. I reached into the folder I'd brought to the door and held it out. Not close enough for her to grab, just enough for her to see. Dates. Times. Screenshots. Clean. Organized. Her eyes flicked over it, then away. The porch felt very still. I lowered the folder. You don't have to explain. I'm not asking for a story. Then what are you doing? She asked, almost pleading now. I'm ending this, I said. Calmly. She looked at the door behind me, at the house she'd been living in like a hotel, and finally understood she wasn't getting back inside. For the first time since that morning, I felt certain, not vindicated, not powerful. Just finished. My phone buzzed while she was still standing there on the porch, staring at the folder like it might rearrange itself into something safer if she waited long enough. I didn't look at it right away. I already knew it wasn't her. She was right in front of me, out of excuses, out of access. It buzzed again. I glanced down. Unknown number. I stepped back inside and closed the door halfway, not to shut her out completely, but to give myself space to think. I answered without greeting. Is this Evan Miller? A woman asked. Yes. There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background, a turn signal clicking. She sounded tired, not nervous. Controlled. My name is Rachel, she said. I'm sorry to call you like this, but I think our lives overlap in a way neither of us wanted. I didn't interrupt. I was with Mark Dalton for 3 years, she continued. We broke up recently. Or at least I thought we did. Then last night I found photos. And timestamps. And a name. She exhaled slowly. Your wife. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because the final piece had arrived without effort. She sent the photos while we were still on the phone. Same address. Same night. Same interior I'd already seen enough of through parking records. Laura's coat on the back of a chair. Mark's reflection in a mirror. Proof layered on top of proof. Rachel didn't sound angry. She sounded finished. I don't want anything from you, she said. I just didn't think you deserved to be the only one in the dark. You're not telling me anything I don't already know, I said. Another pause. Then I'm sorry you had to know it at all. When I hung up, Laura was still on the porch. She'd slumped down onto the step, coat open now, arms wrapped around herself like the temperature had dropped suddenly. I just talked to Rachel, I said. She flinched. Mark's ex, I added. She sent photos. That was it. That was the moment the structure finally collapsed under its own weight. No arguments left. No reinterpretations available. No narrative flexible enough to absorb another witness. Laura didn't cry. Not right away. She just stared at the siding, eyes unfocused, like she was replaying a version of herself that no longer existed. I didn't plan this, she said finally. I nodded. You planned enough. She looked up at me then, really looked, like she was seeing me without the filter she'd been using for months. What do you want? The question landed flat. Too late. Too transactional. I want you to leave, I said. Tonight. Her mouth opened, then closed. She nodded once, slowly, accepting a reality she could no longer bend. As she stood and picked up her bag, I felt something unexpected, not triumph, not even sadness. Just distance, like watching weather pass through after it's already damaged the roof. I went back inside and locked the door. The truth didn't need me to act anymore. It was already moving on its own. The envelope was already on the table when she came back the next morning. Plain, legal size, no return address on the front. I hadn't slept much, but I wasn't tired. There's a kind of rest that comes from deciding something fully and not revisiting it. She stood just inside the doorway, looking smaller than she ever had in this house. No makeup, hair pulled back, the version of herself she never showed the world. What's that? She asked. Information, I said. I slid the envelope toward her but didn't push it all the way. She had to step forward to take it. That mattered to me. Agency cuts both ways. She opened it slowly, like she already knew what was inside but hoped the paper would contradict me. Legal papers. A separation agreement. A lawyer's card clipped neatly to the top page. Her hands shook this time. Just a little. You already talked to a lawyer? She asked. Yes. When? Before you came home last night. She looked up, eyes wide. You moved fast. I shook my head. I moved deliberately. She sat down without being invited. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet room. She flipped through the pages, not really reading, just scanning for something she could argue with. There's no counseling clause, she said. No waiting period. No, I agreed. She swallowed. So that's it? It's been it for a while, I said. You just didn't know yet. She stared at the papers like they were written in another language. You're ending our marriage over one night. I felt no urge to correct her gently. I'm ending it over every lie that made that night possible. Silence stretched. Not tense. Empty. I would have come back, she said. Eventually. I nodded once. You already left. She pressed her lips together, fighting for something. Sympathy, maybe. Or absolution. I didn't offer either. I'm not angry, I said. I don't hate you. But I don't trust you. And I won't live with someone I can't trust. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not really. Just wet, like rain that never commits. What happens now? She asked. You take what's yours, I said. You sign when you're ready. You talk to the lawyer if you need changes. And then we separate. She looked around the room like she was memorizing it. The walls. The table. The life she'd been stepping out of without fully leaving. You're very calm, she said. I know. That seemed to hurt more than anything else. She stood, slid the papers back into the envelope, and tucked it under her arm. At the door, she stopped. I did love you, she said. Not defensively. Almost quietly. I believed her, and it still didn't change anything. I loved you too, I said. That's why this ends clean. She nodded, once, and walked out. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the house settle. No shouting. No collapse. Just an ending that finally matched the truth. I chose myself. Not dramatically. Decisively. The next morning looked ordinary. The alarm went off at the same time. The light came through the same window. Duke waited by the door like he always did, tail thumping once against the wall when I grabbed the leash. The street was already awake. Engines starting, someone jogging past with earbuds in, life moving forward without checking in with me first. I made coffee and drank it this time. There was no dramatic silence in the house. No echo. Just space. Honest space. The kind you don't have to explain away. I went to work. Fixed a furnace that had shut down overnight. The homeowner thanked me like I'd done something heroic. I nodded, packed up my tools, and drove to the next call. My hands knew what to do even while my mind kept settling into its new shape. Nothing collapsed. The world didn't pause. My life didn't end. Only the pretending did. At lunch, I sat in my truck and watched people cross the parking lot, each of them carrying something invisible. Regret, hope, distraction. I realized how long I'd been carrying mine without naming it. That word, dramatic, came back to me, lighter now. Almost irrelevant. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't begged. I hadn't chased explanations. I'd paid attention. That night, I walked into a quiet house that belonged fully to me again. I fed the dog. I locked the door. I turned off the lights when I was ready. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was awake. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough.